Friends and family of GCBCR, good morning. It is good to see you here today. Now, today we're going to talk about facing problems we cannot solve. Facing problems we cannot solve. Now, I know the last couple of weeks has been difficult. You have probably seen a lot of news around the coronavirus epidemic and talk about problems we can't solve, right? This one seems so large. It's not only contained within China, but it is also in the international community. So how can we deal with problems like that, where it's just so overwhelming, so large, so big, so beyond our reach, that we ask ourselves, how do we face such a problem? This is a very difficult question to ask, because many things in our lives are like that. We look at things that's going on in our lives, and most of these problems we see no solution for. We have no idea how to approach the problem that is in our lives. And so many times we just have it weigh us down. We feel alone. It's eating us up inside. And so we don't know how to approach problems like that. Ever felt that way before? Well, last week in English service, we did an exercise that gave us that sense of feeling. We had everyone put several post-it notes on the board at the back that says, expect great things from God and do great things for God. Now, everyone was challenged to put post-it notes on there that had big dreams, right? We talk about 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. What would the English ministry look like? And I will be honest, when I looked at all those post-it notes, it freaked me out. These were all problems that I have no clue how we're going to even start attempting to resolve them. But that's okay, because today as we go through the book of Nehemiah, God is going to show us the way in which He guided Nehemiah and how He guided His people in Jerusalem to tackle a problem that honestly no one has touched for decades. They just simply gave up. And to give you a context as to what we're talking about, we have to first understand the first 2 chapters of Nehemiah. Now, for those who weren't here for the last couple of weeks, this is what had happened. We have started on a journey following Nehemiah in the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. Now, how it started was we learned about this character called Nehemiah. He is a cupbearer to the king, which means he is essentially a food taster. He will taste the food, make sure there's no poison in it, and if he doesn't die, the king will proceed to eat the food. And that is his job, right? It's a very cushy, easy job. Of course, at any point in time, you could just literally die from being poisoned. But other than that, it's a very comfortable job. You're in the palace. You get to eat great food all the time. But what happened was his brother from Judah came along, which is modern day Israel. And so Nehemiah, we have to remember this is during the time of Babylon, and he is in Susa, which is modern day Iran. And so his brother comes along from Jerusalem, and he tells him about the condition of Jerusalem. And this breaks Nehemiah's heart because he learned that the walls are broken. He learned that the gates have been burned. He learned that the people are apathetic towards God. Even though their spiritual walls are broken, their physical world are also broken. And so everything about the Jewish people broke the hearts of Nehemiah. And so Nehemiah started praying and weeping and mourning and fasting for 4 months before the king of Persia at that time, King Artaxerxes, asked him and said, why is this wrong? What is wrong that you feel so sad? And we learned that Nehemiah took a big risk because just looking sad in front of the king could have landed him in a death penalty. But Nehemiah took a big risk and told the king what was on his heart. Not only did the king listen, he provided every single thing that Nehemiah asked for. He asked for timber from the king's garden. He asked for safe passage. He asked for signs that say, let me go through your land, so that other people won't attack him. In fact, not only did the king give him everything that he wanted, through the gracious hand of God, the king gave him more. He gave him cavalry. He gave him officers. He gave him an army. And so Nehemiah, we found out from the last chapter, was that he was being equipped to go towards Jerusalem. Then this week, we learn how Nehemiah approaches the problem. Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem. It's been a couple more months. He's been traveling. And so he is at Jerusalem today. How is he going to approach the problem? How is he going to solve a problem that he has no clue how to solve? And that's the question we want to ask today. And so today's sermon is going to be a little bit different. We're going to not talk a whole lot about personal application, but we're going to talk about facing problems in the context of our English ministry in this church today. How would God lead us, this community, this English congregation in Grace Chinese Baptist, towards rebuilding the wall, towards building the gates into a community that brings glory to God? And so as we're going through Nehemiah, we're going to be digging these biblical truths out and applying it to how the English ministry is going to move forward in the next couple years. Okay? And as we're going through Nehemiah today, we have to ask two critical questions, because these two questions are going to help us think through how Nehemiah faced the problem, as well as for us to say, all right, if those are the two questions we have to answer, what are our answers then? How are we going to approach, how we're going to build up the community here in the English ministries of Grace Chinese Baptist Church? So let's read Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 11 through 20. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on towards the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool. But there were not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officers did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who will be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We are his servant and will start rebuilding. As for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it." If you look at the picture I have up here, we get to see a recreation of the time of Nehemiah. As you see here, Jerusalem is really not that large. Up in the north, there is the temple, and going down towards the south are where all the people are living. This is but a shadow of the glorious Jerusalem during the time of David and during the time of Solomon. And so this really is just a remnant, a shadow of its former glory. The other picture you see on the right is a picture of all the various gates, the various pools, and how Nehemiah was going through his route that night. As you will see, he started in the middle at the Valley Gate, and he went down south to the Dung Gate. Then he tried to circle back up north to the Fountain Gate, but there was so much ruin he couldn't even ride his horse through it, and so he went on foot up north. And at some point, he turned back, went back down to the south, and circled back up to the Valley Gate. And so essentially what he did was he scouted the lower half of Jerusalem just to get a sense for what was happening. It was very deliberate in what he did. And so the first question we want to ask ourselves, and the first question we want to unpack in how Nehemiah approached the problem was, do we know the scope of the problem? Do we know the scope of the problem? Think about what Nehemiah did. He was very deliberate. For 3 days, he just sat in Jerusalem and didn't do a thing, right? He was observing, he was seeing what was going on. And then at the end of the third day, it says he went out at night. No one knew what was going on. And he went around and scouted out and looked at the problem. He had only heard from his brother, remember, about the condition of Jerusalem and how it was in disgrace. And today was the first time he had gone out and be able to see the reality of Jerusalem. See with his own eyes. Is it true what my brother has told me? What would Nehemiah be thinking at this point about the problem that he's trying to scope out? He's probably asking himself, wow, this is quite a big problem. The whole city is in ruins. The walls are down, the gates are burned. Now what? Now what? What can a cupbearer do? I literally just eat food every day and drink fine wine. What do I know about helping a city? What do I know about rebuilding people's lives? I'm not a civil engineer. What can I do? You ever done that? Ever look at a problem and you just say, I have no clue how I'm going to start. I'm just a teacher. What can I do? I'm just a pastor. What can I do? I'm just a social worker. What can I do? I'm just a middle school teenager. What can I do? Sometimes we look at the problems before us and we just have no clue how to go about doing it. But Nehemiah shows us the first thing we got to do is understand the problem. Because we have a tendency of fixing the wrong problems. We spend our time thinking about the problem that's too large when the scope isn't really that huge. We spend a lot of time rushing into fixing things and fixing all the wrong problems. And so Nehemiah showed us a really good way of approaching the problem. First, we got to understand it. What is the scope of our problem? And so if I'll bring it back to our English ministry vision, if you look at the board, and I have it up here on the projector as well, these are the sticky notes that you have all put up last Sunday. The goal there was to say, we are not satisfied with where we are. There are always opportunities to improve. We want to attempt great things for God. We want to expect great things for God. Here at Grace Chinese Baptist Church, we want to experience God in powerful ways. We don't want to do things that are based off of our abilities because those are so limited, but we want to experience God through stepping out in faith and doing things and taking risks and not being bystander. So these post-it note, every single one of them represent a broken brick on the broken wall. Every one of them represent a burned piece of the burned gate that we all need to start building and fixing. And so I spent literally every single day last week staring at this board. I looked at it and asked myself, now what? I looked at it and asked myself, what in the world and how can we go about doing this? And what I did is I compiled all these things up into 3 emerging themes. So this can help us understand better the scope of the problem that we're trying to resolve as an English ministry. The first one is this, it's upward. Upward. There were many notes on there that talked about authentic worship. There were many notes on there that talked about having a love for God. And so the theme for this will be upward, authentic worship and love for God. How can we develop a community here that have an authentic worship and love for God? That seems like an easy statement, but it is very, very difficult to do. The first thing we have to think about is authenticity. How many of us come here every Sunday authentically wanting to worship and love the Lord? I would say the vast majority of us are here for social reasons, for cultural reasons. It may be something that's habitual for us or tradition. How many of us can honestly say when I come on Sundays, when I go to small groups, when I'm involved in church activities, that my heart is an authentic form of worship and love for our Lord? So that's the first theme that came out of all these sticky notes. The second big theme that came out was an inward focus towards the community here at the English ministry at Grace Chinese Baptist. And this is what it says. It says, intergenerational, multi-ethnic community growing through intentional discipleship. I saw so many sticker notes on the wall about intergenerational. People desire to be part of a community that has young people, that has young adults, that has older adults, that has senior adults, so that we can all learn from each other and be discipling each other. There were also multiple notes on there that says, let's be a church that is reaching out to our community, Think about the far west end. It is a multi-ethnic community. It does not look 100% Chinese. And so the heart of our community here are saying that we desire to be a church that reach our community, that reflects our community, and that community is multi-ethnic. To me, that is something that I've always dreamed about, and I thought that was something that only I thought about. But it is so encouraging from God to see so many people putting post-it notes on there that says we want to be a multi-ethnic church, and the gospel is for people of all nations, tribes, language, and tongues. Now, part of this inward also says we want to grow through intentional discipleship. This means we have a culture of mentorship. We have the young and the old coming together, and the old are mentoring the young. The young are mentoring the even younger. And so it becomes a culture where everyone is invested in someone else. You don't come to church and just say, what does God have for me today? No, you come and say, what does God have for me today so that I can pour it back out into the life of others in this community. This is such a big goal, guys. This inward focus that says we want to be intergenerational, multi-ethnic community, giving through intentional discipleship. I stare at this one the most because I have no clue how we're going to go about solving this. But at least the scope for us is clear. This is where we're heading. And the third theme that came out was an outward theme. It talked about how there were so many post-it notes on there that talks about being missional. And so the outward focus would be to be a missional church that is involved both locally and globally. I saw several post-it notes on there that says, can we go on a mission trip to Korea? And this is one that I have a heart for as well. We have done so great in the last couple of years looking at doing local missions. But I do believe that moving on, we want to spread our wings. We want to go further and do international missions in the next couple of years in the English ministry. This is exciting time for us. These are the big problems that all of us stand here today and ask, how are we even going to attempt to do this? This is something that many of us desire to do, but just do not know how to go forward. So how do we go forward? That is the key question. How would God lead Nehemiah towards solving this problem that he has no clue how to solve? And so we want to ask this question today and work on that. So the second big question that Nehemiah asked was this. Have we seen the gracious hand of God in the problem? Have we seen the gracious hand of God in the problem? And I want us to look at this passage here where Nehemiah not only says, hey, this is the problem that we're going to go solve, but this is how God has already prepared ahead of time so that we can go solve this problem, right? If we look at the passage, Nehemiah lays out the problem for the people. He shows the people the impact of their problems, which is there are a people that are disgraced. Then he identifies with them. He says, all right, I've come here not to tell you what to do, but I've come here to identify myself as one of you. It is our work. We are the people of God. I'm in this with you. I have skin in the game. And so let's work together to solve this problem. And then he shows them the gracious hand of God. All right, pay attention to this verse. He says, look at all the timber and the army and the cavalry and the king's approval. Look at all the things that the Persian king have already provided for you. And then he says something that's key here. He says, it is through the gracious hand of God. It is through the gracious hand of God that he has already provided all of these things, all the needs you have to rebuild the walls and the gates and your lives. All you got to do now is to get started. God has already provided for you. You just need to get the work started. And if we go back to the English ministry and we look back at the last couple of years, can we honestly say that the gracious hand of God has been in our English ministry? Can we honestly say that God has provided and we should get the work started? Because now we see the problem that's in front of us. Can we go and build the wall upward to develop authentic worship and love for God? Can we build a wall and build the gates inward through intergenerational multi-ethnic community, growing through intentional discipleship? Can we fix the wall and the gates outward by being a missional church both locally and globally? And I believe the answer is yes. What I want to show you right now is a graph. This graph shows the English Sunday service attendance from 2015 through present. Okay, 2015 through present. I want you to see how the gracious hand of God has just been so mighty, brought so much blessing, have completely transformed our English ministry in just a short 4-5 years. If you look at the chart back in 2015, we were averaging in the mid-50s. That's it. Mid-50s, we had one small group. Now, excluding the youth from here, I'm talking adults only, we only had one small group for adults. In 2016, we had an increase in attendance, and if you look at this chart, it is an average 7% increase. Every year we're growing by an average of 7%. We see that now we have two small groups because the adults now have added on a new small group called the Young Adult Small Group. We've started seeing young adults and college students come back, and so we started a new group for them. And also at this point in 2016 was a pivotal moment. Our adults population started exceeding our youth population, which had never happened before in our English congregation. In 2017, we see the adult small group multiplying from 2 to 3, and the reason was because one of our small groups became so large that they had to multiply into 2 separate groups. In 2018, now not only do we have 3 small groups, now we have 7 small groups. Our young family small group got so large, they multiplied into 2 groups. We added a new adult small group called Mana, ministering to mixed culture spouses and couples. And then we also started a men's group and a women's group. So by 2018, we had 7 small groups going on. Now you'll notice in 2019, there were still 7 small groups. We didn't grow in terms of the number of small groups, but I want you to see what happened in 2019. An incredible amount of things happened that year. First, we had our first ever family retreat. The vast majority of our English small group families went. It was one of the best retreats I've been to because it was so chill and so relaxing. But we got to invest in each other during that retreat. We saw young adults taking care of babies and toddlers for the young family. It was such a beautiful thing to see. We also hired a youth director on staff. Pastor Rowe, who's been with us for 2 years, we brought him in. We just love him so much, and we have really seen our youth ministry take off because he has joined us formally. Then we also see a burst in community engagement. We are now in our community multiple times a year, investing in Goochland, investing in the community, working a lot with Goochland Cares, working a lot with Goochland County. And so we have just seen people from our church pour out into local missions. This is something, I'll be honest, that I had very, very little faith with. When we first started with community engagement, maybe about 3 years ago, most of it were youth, right? It was very sporadic. Whenever we had youth event, we would say, well, what kind of community service should we do? But now it has become a cultural DNA in our church. People look forward to it. In fact, each time we have community engagement, we have far more adults than youth now. And that is such an encouraging thing to me. Thank you for Kathy for leading last year's community events. And I look forward to 2020 events. We also started a church plant partnership with the Way Church down in Short Pump. Now we're working with a church planter. We're supporting them financially. We're sending resources to them on Sundays to help build up that church plant so that we can reach Short Pump with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And let me tell you this one gets me the most excited. Last year, 3 times, we broke 100 in attendance. And I'm not talking about barely over 100. I'm talking about 140. This to me is just amazing to see this kind of growth. In a time now where many churches are plateauing or declining, it is amazing for me to continue to see our church grow steadily, 7% on average every year. This is just amazing and so encouraging to me. And the reason I want to show you this is to show you that the gracious hand of God is already in our midst. It's been working powerfully in our community. And so all we got to do is just pick up our tools and say, let's move forward. Let's drive towards the vision that we have with the upward and the inward and the outward. It is amazing to me that all these things are going on. And we have one big milestone to look forward to in 2022. That's when phase 2 is going to be completed. The English ministry is going to move into that new building. And we're going to have our own sanctuary. We're going to have a bunch of new classrooms. We're going to have a children's activity center. We're going to have a fellowship hall. That is a big milestone for us. And so if we look at our projected growth between now and 2022, we will be in the mid-90s if we continue on with this growth trend of 7%. We're going to be in the mid-90s by the time we go into that building. But that's not where we want to be, right? Because that assumes we do nothing. That assumes we go with status quo. That assumes that nothing really changes fundamentally between now and 2022. If you look back at the board, that is not the heart of our community here. We are not content with business as usual. We are not content with status quo. We want to experience God in powerful ways, in ways that we can say, wow, that was a God thing. That was not a me thing. Where we can go and say, wow, God did this and that and that and that. And we get to just step back and watch that happen. We get to celebrate the gracious hand of God continuing to work in this community. And so this is the challenge. In the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, let's move together as a community. Let's move towards upward, inward, and outward. What you see in your handout today is a prayer card. And in the prayer card, you'll see a picture of Jerusalem during the time of Nehemiah. And I'm going to quote Nehemiah 2:17 here that says, "Come, let us build the walls and gates of the Lord at GCBCR." Which part of the gate will you be building? Will you be building the upward part? Are you going to invest in ministries of authentic worship and love for God? If that is the burden of your heart, invest in it. Go for it. Run with it. Is your burden on inward? Maybe you have a burden and conviction for intergenerational, multi-ethnic community growing through intentional discipleship. If that's something that God has placed in your heart, go for it. Run after it hard. Attempt great things for God so that you may experience great things for God. Maybe you're the last one where your heart is about mission. You want to see our church be a missional church, both locally and globally. Go for it. Run with it. Go build it. Let's work together as a community here as we begin to move forward in this new direction. As we build the walls and repair the gates at Grace Chinese Baptist Church English Ministry. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, for this time that through the book of Nehemiah, Lord, you have given us a renewed vision. One that, Lord, I believe is biblical. One that I believe, Lord, that you have convicted our hearts with. One that is kingdom focused. I pray for each person here today, God. I pray that you convict their hearts, that you give them a burden that they can run with, a burden that cannot be shaken off, God, no matter how hard they try to run away from it. I pray, Lord, that you give them a burden that will be investing their lives in this English ministry at Grace Chinese Baptist because they know that their work is kingdom focused, because they know that their work is eternal focus, because they know that their work has everlasting impact. And so, God, I pray for each person here this morning, God, that you challenge us, that you burden us, God, that you give us the motivation to get up from our pews and move forward and start building your gates and start building the walls of your kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.